This is the Silver Bullet Security Podcast with Gary McGraw. I'm your host, Gary McGraw, CTO of Cigital and author of Software Security. This podcast series is co-sponsored by Cigital and IEEE Security and Privacy Magazine, where a portion of this interview will appear in print. For more, see www.computer.org/security or www.cigital.com/silverbullet. This is a landmark 50th in a series of interviews with security gurus, and today we're shooting video as well as recording the podcast. You can find the video on Silver Bullet websites. And I'm happy to have with me today Richard Clarke. Hello.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Richard A. Clarke is an internationally recognized expert on national security, counterterrorism, and cybersecurity. He's an on-air consultant for ABC News and teaches at the Kennedy School of Government. Dick served for 11 consecutive years in the White House for 3 different presidents, including a stint as special advisor to the president for cybersecurity. Before his work in the White House, Dick worked in the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and State Department. These days, Dick lives in Virginia and is a partner at Good Harbor Consulting, where we're shooting this video. He's the author of a number of books, including Against All Enemies and his new book, Cyber War, which is orange, and we'll talk about that today. He has a BS from Penn and an MS from the MIT. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it a lot. One of the points you hammer home in your new book, Cyber War, is that the U.S. is more dependent on cyber infrastructure than potential enemies, say North Korea or Iran. When you factor in defense as well as offense, it seems that we're not in such great shape from a cyber war perspective. So what's to be done to change the focus of the emerging cyber command from offense to defense?
Well, several things there. That's a rich question. First of all, we are very dependent on cyber systems. Mm-hmm. And when you think about one's cyber strength as a nation, I think you need to take into account your dependence, the level of your dependence on cyber, and your ability to defend that, and your offensive capability. All three, I think, are factors.
Yep.
U.S. Cyber Command actually says it has a predominantly defensive mission.
Do they?
Yeah. But the only thing they're defending is themselves and the Pentagon, the rest of the military. Mm-hmm. They're not defending even the civilian agencies of government.
Right. That's
Homeland's job.
Mm-hmm.
And someday they may be able to do that. Homeland can't do it today.
Right.
And Cyber Command is certainly not defending things that are owned by private companies like banks or the power grid or railroads or anything else. Mm-hmm. So I think in answer to your question, what's to be done, there has to be a big policy decision at the highest levels to say somebody, whether it's Cyber Command or DHS, somebody should be given the responsibility to defend the nation as a whole against cyber espionage, cyber crime, and heaven forbid, someday a cyber war.
Right. So asymmetry and asymmetric warfare are also parts of the situation that you have to consider. It's fairly straightforward for one person to cause a really big impact in a cyber attack, and it's really hard to assign blame. So, can we alleviate that problem, or are we really stuck with it? I guess it's related to, the guy who tried hard to blow up Times Square very poorly.
I think one person can do a lot of damage, but not a catastrophe. Mm-hmm. I think at the moment we're talking about nation states and maybe criminal cartels to do things like take down a power grid. Mm-hmm. I think one individual probably won't have all the skill sets and all the abilities and all the simultaneous activity that has to go on to make that happen. So we're talking right now about other nations, and there is an asymmetry. So you have North Korea, for example, which has virtually no cyberspace of its own, which has to go outside of its country in order to attack.
Right.
They go to China and they rent hotel suites set up in Chinese hotels. They go to South Korea, where they blend in and properly operate out of safe houses.
Right.
So here's this nation with no cyberspace and with very little else going for it. And yet it has an ability to launch cyber attacks against the United States. So there's a threshold that you have to get over, but it's a pretty low threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And then any nation, no matter how small, no matter how poor, if they get above that little threshold, then they can do real damage, even to a big country.
Mm-hmm. So I've written a bunch of very geeky books on software security. Some are good guy books, like software security, and some are bad guy books. I use that with scare quotes around it, like exploiting software. And the bad guy books outsell the good guy books about 4 to 1. So it seems that people suffer from what I call the NASCAR effect when it comes to computer security. Watching the crashes is way sexier than preventing them. How can we get people to realize the importance of cyber war and the problem that we're facing without resorting to FUD? Or is there...
I've tried to do that in the book. I tried not to overstate the thing. And one of the things I say is, look, we're not going to have a cyber war just because nations went out and got cyber weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy I make is there are 9 nations that have nuclear weapons that we know of.
Right.
And they don't go around using nuclear weapons just because they have them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, nobody's ever used a nuclear weapon in anger except the United States, and we did that in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
So just because nations are acquiring cyber commands does not mean they're going to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
It works the other way around. If a nation makes a decision to go to war for the reasons that they normally do, economic, political, ideological, then they look for what their weapons are. So no one is going to attack us in a big way, cyber war, just for the heck of it.
Well, I'm sort of thinking about how you engage the policymakers and the public in understanding this without, look, some of the things that can happen, you and I both know, and the people that listen to this podcast know that they're serious and they really can happen. But when you say it to the general public, they think you're Chicken Little.
Right. So. And so you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
And therefore, I talk about cyber espionage as a motivator. Because people can't get motivated about cyber war. It's never happened in any big way, certainly not to us. Perhaps it did to Estonia and Georgia and other countries. But it hasn't happened to us in a big way. And until it does, people are not going to take it seriously. Right. So let's talk about cyber espionage as a thing that happens every day and is costing the United States a lot of competitive advantage in the world. Because we're spending stockholder money and taxpayer money on R&D.
Right.
And then that R&D is acquired for pennies on the billions by people who hack in and steal it.
Like the Google attack, for example.
Google attack is one example of the attack on the F-35, an airplane that hasn't even flown in service yet. And yet vast amounts of data about it have been stolen. 300 British companies got a letter from the head of the British Security Service saying, you have to assume your company has been successfully hacked by China.
Right.
It doesn't just happen in Britain. It's happened in the United States, and we just haven't sent that letter out yet.